Hello, and welcome to Fraud Eat Strategy, a white collar forensic podcast series in which we explore the myriad ways that financial crime, corruption, and misconduct can derail strategy and cause havoc. I'm Scott Moritz, president of White Collar Forensic, where, together with our partners from Integrity Risk International, assist clients and their outside counsel in managing their response to white collar crime, money laundering, and bribery incidents, assist in the pursuit of financial recoveries and help fix the things that were exposed as broken along the way. Thank you for listening. In Greek mythology, Pandora was a mortal woman created by the gods as punishment to the human race after Prometheus stole fire. Her name meant all gifted, and she received gifts from all the gods like Aphrodite's beauty, Athena's cleverness, and Zeus's curiosity. But one of her gifts was a sealed box that contained evils like sickness, death, and sorrow, which would be unleashed upon the world if she opened it. Pandora's box has long been a metaphor for an action that has the potential for terrible consequences. And while it is an often used, if not overused, simile, I can think of no better symbol for the potential for great harm that the explosion of artificial intelligence and the potential furies it may release upon the world. Fear not, though, because we have someone joining us in today's episode who has lots of practical advice on how to govern AI, harness its power, and safeguard against its potential harmful effects. Andrea Boning Blanc and I are former colleagues dating back to when she was the general counsel at Daylight Forensic and Advisory, where I was an executive director. We've been great friends ever since. Andrea Bonham-Blanc is both an attorney and a PhD and a global expert on future-proofing organizations. She offers keynotes, strategies, and solutions to find sustainable growth in a rapidly changing world. She's the founder and CEO of GEC Risk Advisory, a board member, strategic advisor, and multiple book author. She specializes in the governance of change, focusing on global strategic risk, leadership trust, geopolitical change, sustainability, cyber resilience, and exponential tech, advising business, NGOs, and government. A former C-suite executives at 4 companies, including Bertelsmann, PSE&G, and Verint, who has served as chief legal, risk, ethics, sustainability, and cybersecurity officer, and serves on several boards and advisory boards. She's a senior fellow at several institutions, including the Conference Board's Governance and Sustainability Center, NYU Center for Global Affairs, and she serves as AI Ethics Strategy Fellow at the American College for Financial Services. She's an independent ethics advisor to the Financial Oversight and Management Board for Puerto Rico and founding global faculty at the Institute for Corporate Directors Malaysia Mandatory Board Sustainability Certificate. She is a life member of the Council on Foreign Relations, and in 2023, she was named a Diligent Governance 100, and in 2022, an NACD Directorship 100, and an Analytical Top 50 ESG Influencers. Her credentials go on and on. I am so pleased to have Andrea on the show, and welcome and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Scott. It's a pleasure and fun. I know it's going to be fun to be here with you today since we always have fun. We've been having fun for a long time. So thank you for having me.
I'm looking forward to our discussion. So, as you know, I'm not usually a pessimist, although working in my field can certainly result in a somewhat jaundiced view of the human race if you allow it. And with AI and some of the ways that transnational crime fraudsters and cyber criminals have sought to exploit its power, I can't help but think about dystopian movies when contemplating AI's potential to do great harm. In the movie The Terminator, the movie starts with the premise that artificial intelligence has already come to the inescapable conclusion that humans are the problem and the robots decide that we have to go. I'm hoping it doesn't come to that, and I'm looking to you, Andrea, to make sure of it. So, no pressure.
None whatsoever, of course.
So, jokes aside, one of the greatest governance and legal challenges that seems to exist is for the legal and compliance guardrails to keep pace with the rapidly changing technological landscape. And with the potential for AI to expose and surface existential threats, including things that perhaps none of us have even contemplated, how do organizations embrace the use of exponential technology while still staying true to the ethical principles and the need to be a good corporate citizen and stewards of our environment, political landscape, economy, and to the need for organizational leadership to remain relevant?
So my whole approach to this issue, this big sort of exponential tech issue that we're now facing, which AI has certainly turbocharged and presented to us in ways that we could not even imagine. But there are other technologies that are moving fast too, both interconnected with generative AI and agentic AI and all these other developments. There's a sort of an explosion of exponential techs. And what does that mean to the average corporate decision maker, board member, policy maker, person on the street? What it means is we need to be prepared. The most important thing that we need to think about is not that we're going to forecast the future or that we're going to know the future, because I can guarantee you none of us do. Maybe one of those very highly resource AIs can give us some scenarios, but even the AIs aren't really capable of doing that. So what I would say is preparation, 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 resilience, resilience, resilience. And I've been saying that forever. You remember our time together at Daylight. My job wasn't just general counsel. I also took over risk management, crisis management, the corporate secretarial job, and a few other things that we did together. And then I did separately, which was about building the organizational resilience muscle of the company. And the same needs to be done now with a vengeance, with the right people, with the right interdisciplinary teams, with the right forecasting and foresight that is needed to understand what's going on, because it's going on so fast, we can't keep up. So for me, it's not about predicting, it's about preparing. So that would be my main message in answer to your enormous question.
We'll try to keep my questions more concise going forward. But yes, as I was reading it, I said, this is a terrible question. And yet you answered it very
I
elegantly. So
try,
thank you for that.
anytime.
Um, a follow-up question, which I will now, present perhaps more thoughtfully. So this month, Anthropic, the creator of the popular Claude AI tool, recently announced that their new AI offering, Mythos, is too powerful and too dangerous to release widely. And if they think it's too powerful and too dangerous, what are we supposed to think? So instead, it announced plans to share the model with roughly 40 organizations that provide technology used in maintaining critical global infrastructure like the internet and So how should organizations factor like super AI into their planning? Because it feels like wait and see is probably not a good plan.
Now, this whole explosion of this new version of Claude that Anthropic has not released. I told you there would be sirens, and we got the sirens. Okay.
Well, they were very timely as we're talking about something
Well, there you go.
existentially scary.
Put your five alarm fire alarms on. No, the thing that it was most surprising to me, maybe not surprising, but it kind of felt like we got quantum de-encryption before we got quantum. The whole mythos power, the power of this version of the Anthropic's AI in their own consideration is so powerful that they couldn't release it in good conscience. And I think I want to say two things about that. On the one hand, thankfully, it was Anthropic that has developed this, although there will be others that will develop similarly powerful AIs. It's just a matter of time, and not long time, short time. But I was glad that Anthropic was the company that came here first, apparently, and rung the alarm bells to say, this is extremely powerful. We cannot release it into the wild. We need to get a bunch of responsible entities, both governmental and business, to test drive this thing and to understand it before we put it out into the open. Because if it gets out into the open, the hackers, the national security actors, the criminal gangs will get their hands on something so powerful that they might be able to de-encrypt and or attack financial institutions, electrical grids, all the critical infrastructure that you mentioned earlier. And so for me, number one, I was glad that it was Dario Amodei and Anthropic that were behind this particular event, because he has distinguished himself and the company has distinguished itself as being more responsible than, say, a few others I can think of, maybe OpenAI, maybe Meta, and a couple of others. And so his bringing this out to the surface was very, very important at the time that it happened. Now, there have been other developments where apparently others have gotten their hands. There was some leakage. This stuff is going to happen. It's going to continue to happen. And the bad actors will get their hands on this stuff. And the question is, can we be more prepared than the bad actors? I don't know. I have a bad feeling that something nasty will happen that's quite material, whether it's the US or the world. And it's then when the governments and the other responsible actors will come together to find solutions. But we're not there yet. And so for me, the sort of responsibility leadership that Amodei and Anthropic have shown came through with this particular incident. And they shared it through this project Glasswing with, as you say, about 40 other institutions that are test driving it. This, of course, will not prevent the Chinese or some other company that has developed a very advanced form of super AI to deploy it at some point. So we're just at the beginning of the roller coaster ride, let's put it that way.
Without question. So, Andrea, in addition to your expertise on AI governance, you've been a leading voice on environmental sustainability and governance, ESG. And for the longest time, it seemed like most of what was measurable was the E. Then ESG compliance matured and it became more multifaceted and balanced. But interestingly, the rapid growth of AI is leading to huge spikes in the consumption of power and water. And it seems like a perfect ESG storm. Is part of governing exponential technology solving for the insatiable consumption of power and water?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You may recall that in a book prior to the one that I just wrote called Governing Pandora, I wrote a book in 2020 called Gloom to Boom, How Leaders Transform Risk into Resilience and Value. And the book was focused on what I called ESG plus T. So everybody was talking about ESG, but nobody was bringing in all the technological issues, risks, opportunities that were already percolating quite a bit in the marketplace and otherwise. And so I was making the case then that when we talk about our portfolio of issues, risks, and opportunities in the ESG and sustainability space, we need to integrate everything that's happening from a technological standpoint. I did not know at that point that the deployment of Gen AI, which hadn't come out yet into the public, at least it didn't come out till 2023, but how this explosion of need for water and electricity was going to come down the pike. Nobody really knew that until it started happening in the last couple of years. And so it still meant that we needed to think about the technology issues, whether it was cybersecurity or insecurity, whether it was AI governance, whether it was some other forms of, impact on the environment. If you think about biotech issues and synthetic bio, which is one of the chapters that I have in the book, that also has enormous environmental consequences and social consequences if we create weaponized biotech into weapons of war, basically, or weapons of terror. So the long and the short, in terms of my answer for you, is that when a company, an organization, a government agency, policymakers think about the build out of more compute power through these huge data centers that everyone wants to build everywhere, they have to think about the ESG consequences of that on the local communities, on the people, on the workers. And that's already unfolding in a big way in different parts of the US, for sure, and certainly in different parts of the world. In the US, we have already battle royal in some of the states about whether you're going to build a data center in my backyard or not. And if you do, are you going to employ local people, keep them employed? Are you going to keep our electricity prices normalized and not suddenly charge us a lot more because these are big power hogs, these data centers? So the long and the short is there's a battle royal happening already. The popular perception of AI in the US is very low compared to a bunch of other countries. We're at the lowest. The popularity of AI is at the lowest of about 20 countries. So, how it affects our local communities, our workers, the whole fear of losing your job to AI is a huge portion of this as well. So ESG plus T, or whatever you want to call it, is here to stay. It's sustainability, it's technology, and companies and organizations that don't put it all together into a portfolio of issues, risks, and opportunities that they need to consider as they create their strategy, as they deal with their stakeholders, as they engage with the communities, et cetera, are companies that are going to have a reputational consequence, and it won't be a good one.
Thank you for that. So, in your latest book, Governing Pandora, you identify five main types of exponential technologies: Gen AI, biotechnology and synthetic biology, advances in material science, frontier computing, and advanced automation and autonomy. I would imagine in order for today's leaders to effectively govern exponential tech, they need to have an above average understanding of which technologies are in use in their organizations, how they're being used, and the benefit that the company is seeking to derive from these advances in technology and the potential risks that they may pose. Easy to say, but maybe not as easy to operationalize. So what is the best way to give C-suite executives a crash course in these technologies so that they can make informed risk-based decisions and allocate sufficient resources to put controls and compliance guardrails in place?
Another tiny question. You specialize in these really minor, sort of unimportant
Hey,
questions.
go bigger.
I agree with you. I agree. I make the point in my book, and I may be wrong, but I'll put myself out there that we have entered the fifth industrial or post-industrial revolution, also exponential technology revolution, because of Gen AI and all these other interconnected technologies. And you've mentioned the five buckets of technology that I review in my book, which are kind of a primer on each of these five areas. That doesn't mean that there aren't a whole bunch of others out there that are relevant to your particular company or your particular footprint. And so one of the things I would recommend for C-suites, especially, and senior executives, is be a continuous learner in the technology space. Keep looking at the articles, the headlines, the developments. Take some courses. There's a ton of courses out there, free on the internet from great sources, universities, etc. So inform yourself. Listen to some of these really great podcasts that are giving you the latest and greatest on some of these issues. So don't, make excuses that you don't have enough time in the day. Make time to understand technology today and into tomorrow. Because if you don't, one of the things that might suffer tremendously is the development of your business strategy, because you haven't really understood how some of these technologies may come into your sector, your footprint, and maybe perhaps replace some of your products and services, and or eat your company for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And so I really think it behooves all decision makers right now to really understand where their technological footprint is today, what technologies are relevant to their sort of business planning and strategy, informing, educating continuously, and then making sure that their entire workforce is brought up to speed as well with whatever reskilling, skilling, and other kinds of educational support that is needed for purposes of maintaining not only a happy workforce and an employee workforce, but one that can help you achieve your sort of business plans and tactics and strategies. So I think it's about being informed. It's about being educated. It's about having the staff also in that environment of continuous education. And then the rest of it has to fall from there. You have to have the competitive analysis of who's doing what to whom, not just within your sector, but from other sectors and from the startup community. And then you can start thinking about, how do we guardrail this? How do we create the internal controls? How do we make proper risk-based decisions? And I'll leave you with one more thought that I often speak about. Which is for anything that you're creating from a technology standpoint, whether it's data coming in, algorithms being created, software being deployed, have a multidisciplinary team looking at those issues. Have the ethics person or the audit person or the IT controls person working together with the inventors, the engineers, the technologists, so that they can in real time design some of those things in place for your products and services as they go through their life cycle.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, that's so important. I'm actually involved in a couple of things that are going about it that way. And they understand that you're bringing this deep technological expertise on AI or kind of advanced graphing or the study of like data nodes, et cetera, to manage, kind of these big problems. But if you don't overlay other disciplines from business, from subject matter expertise and different compliance disciplines, or what have you, you're kind of creating something in a vacuum, and it's unlikely to meet the need that is underlying why they're doing this in the first place. I want to follow up with a question I asked you previously, which is, what's the best time to implement controls and compliance guardrails? Is it before you adopt exponential technologies, while you're integrating them into your operations, or after you've gone live?
All of the above. One of the things I talk about in my book, and I co-wrote a very interesting AI governance playbook with my friends at the Athena Alliance about 3 years ago. That was a group of us who wrote this. One of the things that I contributed to the paper was that we need to have a life cycle approach to providing governance guardrails controls. It begins at inception. Are you inventing or creating your own technology, or are you purchasing it from the outside, from a vendor, from a partner? It has to happen right then and there. Having those multidisciplinary eyes on what is this? What are its characteristics? Have we created the right kind of prompt structure within the discussions that we've created in terms of instructions to our agentic AI, for example? You can build those guardrails already right there and then at the very inception, but then you need to have this continuous multidisciplinary eyes on the prize as it goes through the life cycle. So at inception, at development, at testing, you want to have those red teams coming in and testing and triple testing whether things are working properly or not. Then you want to make sure you have eyes on something that's deployed to external clients or parties. And then you want to have troubleshooting deployed, also multidisciplinary troubleshooting if there are issues in the marketplace and or the product or service has to be sunset. And we've seen some examples already of companies that have stopped certain products because they were too expensive to make, but other times it's maybe because what they had created was a little bit of a monster, so they didn't want to keep deploying it out into the marketplace. I think there's a responsibility for continuous governance of these exponential technologies throughout the various life cycle periods of each product.
Well, I think what you just described is what compliance or risk management should look like inside of an organization. I think at its minimum comprehension level, when companies are first adopting some sort of compliance or risk management capability, it's very transactional. But really, when you want to, get to a point where it's optimized, it's a continuum. All of these things, they might follow a linear progression, but then new incidents or new risks are going to emerge. And then the process just continues to go in a circular manner where you're adopting these best practices, you're applying lessons learned, you're implementing those lessons learned into the operations. And then the hope is that you are continuing to become a more of a resilient organization by executing well. But yeah, I think, you got to walk before you run, and not everybody's in that, optimized posture. Certainly um, poses a pretty significant disruptive effect on your ability to execute successfully on your strategy.
Absolutely.
So, in your book, you talk about the need to develop what you call an exponential governance mindset. What are the elements of this mindset, and how can leaders assimilate them into their leadership toolkit?
When I was writing the book, as I mentioned earlier on, my whole thing is about being prepared. Preparedness, knowing what to look at, knowing what to do. And so I came up with these 5 very intuitive, very organic things that we all do if we do them in our organizations already. But I try to put a more urgent spin and a more future ready kind of spin on them. So the first one is something I've already described a couple of times here, which is making sure that leadership is deploying what I call a 360 tech governance in the organization. And this is not a nice to have. This is a must have, but it's very hard to get there. And so it's about having the board of directors, senior management, and frontline IT workers all singing out of the same hymnal in terms of the technologies that are being used, the platforms that are being deployed within an organization. It's, again, easier said than done and very hard to achieve, but it's necessary because I have heard so many times from friends who are chief technology officers and steeped in the engineering and technology aspects of it, is that IT teams are operating in silos on the front lines, not knowing anything about what anybody else is doing. They're all putting out fires, and this is a recipe for disaster. So it's incumbent on management, and even more in some ways on the board, to set the tone in terms of what is tech governance going to look like in my company, in my organization, and have a real plan that deploys whatever technologies are necessary in terms of what the tone from the top is and what incentives you're going to give to management and to the executive team and the CEO to get that done. And then that trickles down into the entire organization. So it's creating a 360 tech governance structure. That's number one. Number two is what I call ethos, and it's about deploying a responsible tech culture. And this is all about ethics and compliance. It's all about how do you structure your organization for the bottom line to be really important here. That is that everybody in the organization and the subcontractors and contractors can speak up without fear of retaliation on tech issues. If you have that structure in place already, make sure it includes all the IT people, all the people who are using the technologies or creating them. You want to create a sort of a culture that allows anyone to speak up if they see an issue that is a risk issue, safety issue, an ethical issue when it comes to tech. Number three is what I call impact, and it's about putting your stakeholders in the tech loop, understanding who your most important stakeholders are. They could be workers, customers, communities, etc. But knowing how your tech impacts those critically important stakeholders to your company or your organization, and dealing with them in a responsible way, making sure they don't get hurt, they don't get some awful consequences from the technology, knowing the expectations of key stakeholders in terms of your tech impact, and making sure that you are talking to them and deploying policies that will accommodate those needs. Fourth is what I call resilience, and here it's about deploying poly-risk and poly-crisis preparedness, this big words for describing having an enterprise risk management system that is properly future-oriented and having the right tools, data, information, that it's a first-century ERM, business continuity, crisis management, red teaming, auditing, controls, all that package. And then the final element is what I call foresight, and that's, again, creating a future-ready business strategy. And it brings all the other things together into how are you going to deal with your competitors, those that you know about and those that you don't know about. From a technology standpoint, how are you going to create the future for your shareholders and your stakeholders?
We've highlighted and tapped into your AI and ESG expertise, and now I'm going to take you a little earlier back in the timeline as a compliance subject matter expert that you are. Um, you know that a compliance program that looks great on paper certainly doesn't meet anyone's definition of effective. They have to be operationalized, as you well know. And that is exactly um, what you're advocating for is that once leaders have developed an exponential governance mindset, they have to deploy it. It's one thing to understand it, but to have the political will and the foresight, to put it into force. What advice do you have for business leaders to future-proof their organizations in the age of exponential technologies?
I end the book with 2 chapters that talk about future-proofing, and I break it down into 3 levels. One is how do we future-proof ourselves? How do we survive and thrive in these really challenging times that are daunting? I have so many friends who are saying, I'm so scared, I don't want to know anything about this. And I'm like, that's not an option. Don't be scared, just get informed. One of the things I say in one of those future-proofing chapters, I review 10 characteristics of the future-ready person. What are the things that you, Scott, as a business leader, and myself, and others who are board members or policymakers, and there are things that we really need to do that we haven't been doing that well, especially leaders. We have to be humble that we don't know what we don't know. And there's so much that we don't know. So that means that we have to be curious about learning. We have to be continuous learners, and we have to bring in other people. It has to be this multidisciplinary approach, a systems-wide approach, a systemic approach. I have a number of those ideas and prescriptions for individuals. Now, if you're talking about your organization, that's the second level. And there it's about, have you ticked some of the boxes on those 5 pillars of the exponential governance mindset, but what kind of a culture is your leader bringing forth? And I have a matrix there of the kinds of cultures that will be successful for organizations going forward. And I spin off of Mark Zuckerberg's Move Fast and Break Things, which is a very common kind of culture that we see on Silicon Valley and other techs, where they don't care about the guardrails and the controls and the compliance that we talk about. They just want to make the most money as fast as possible and be the biggest gorilla in the Silicon universe. We have those kinds of people, but then we have people who are moving fast, but they're not quite dispensing with the guardrails. So it's move fast and build things is what I call them. And I put certain kinds of companies, certainly Anthropic is in there, Microsoft, Google. There's a few that are really working in that direction, thinking about some of the risks and the guardrails that need to be attended to. And then there's others that are going to go to sleep and disappear because they're not moving fast or slow or doing anything that's going to allow them to survive in this very, very intense period that we're in. That's the organizational piece. And then I talk about the global commons. I have 4 frontiers of the global commons, the biological, the mechanical, which is about robots and automation, the planetary, which is about climate tech and space tech. And then I have the virtual, which is about cyber, about AI and Gen AI, about all the different things that we're doing in this other dimension. And how do we do it with responsibility? How do we do it with caring for our neighbors and our communities and other nations around the world? And so the global commons piece is really, really important for all of us. And I try to give us these 4 lenses to look at it. But I conclude with 2 things that I think are absolutely essential, must-haves, not nice-to-haves. One is diversity of experience and expertise coming together. And the other one is trust. We need to create the trust. And so, I complete my discussion with some ideas about how we do that. To go back to your point, we all have to adopt a future-ready, a future-oriented approach and be curious and understand what's going on around us so that we can implement those operationalization of risk management and compliance and a few other things that are necessary.
Well, you, I think, were alluding to these 2 terms without calling them out by name. And in the book, you have 2 terms that you use: tech masters of the universe and tech guardians of the universe. Let's assume we should be listening to the guardians. In addition to your leadership in this area, who else should we be listening to for advice when it comes to governing the risks of exponential tests?
I'll tell you, I may be wrong in the end, but I really think the writings and teachings, if you want to call it that, of Dario Amodei, the CEO and co-founder of Anthropic. He has a blog. Check it out. He's constantly talking about stakeholder impact, safety, and all these other things. And he's actually acting it out too in terms of his public persona with, the confrontation with the DOD, for example, and with some other things, this whole mythos thing of not releasing it into the public because he's concerned about the safety implications. I think he's someone in the corporate world or in the tech world that is worth looking at. Mustafa Suleyman, he's the head of AI for Microsoft. He also has a very thoughtful series of blogs and posts. So that's the corporate world. Then you have a whole slew of fabulous people and organizations that are constantly educating us about the guardrails and the risks and so on. Chief among these, I really single out Tristan Harris and Adam Raslaf, who are part of the Center for Humane Technology, and actually got me thinking about this a few years ago. They're the guys who put together the Social Dilemma documentary about 10 years ago about social media. And they're doing similar things now on AI. They just came out with a documentary called The AI Doc. I haven't seen it yet, but it's all about this kind of thing. So they're people to follow. Then there's a whole bunch of other institutions. There's All Tech is Human, based in New York and global. Stanford has a Center for Human-Centric Technology. MIT has a risk repository that they're constantly updating, which is an amazing resource. There's a lot of regional resources. The Africa AI Observatory has a great bunch of things that they offer. Of course, the OECD, the EU, Council on Foreign Relations actually has a fabulous page of experts who write articles regularly on all of these topics. I think it's a fantastic resource. It's a nonprofit, think tank. And then there's the UN, UNESCO. There's so many resources. So that actually gives me hope that there are so many people devoted to trying to find solutions, even if we're kind of all fragmented and all over the place. At least it's happening, even when our governments aren't being responsible. So that's what I would offer.
I feel less anxious now than I did at the top of the hour. And I feel incrementally better equipped to understand the risk of exponential technology now that we've spoken. So thanks so much for coming on and for sharing your insights. And how do people get your book?
Oh, well, just go straight to Amazon, type in Governing Pandora. It's the only book with that name. And I also have a book page on my website, gcrisk.com, which has summaries of the chapters. It has a bunch of articles I've used past. Your podcast will be there shortly, Scott, whenever you release it, our podcast together. So I have a bunch of book-related things there, also upcoming events and past events. Thank you for asking.
I'm so glad that you were able to join me today on this episode, and thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me, Scott. It was a lot of fun, as per usual, whenever we get together.
So that was change governance expert and author of the book Governing Pandora, Andrea Bonin-Blanc. This concludes this episode of Fraud Eats Strategy. I'm Scott Moritz, president of White Collar Forensics. Thanks for listening, and stay tuned for the next episode. If you have an idea about a fraud or corruption case, topic, or guest that you'd like to hear from on a future episode, email us through our website at whitecollarforensic.com. Thank you for listening.